Aren't
you going to introduce us?
This is Willie Scott. This is Indiana Jones, famous archaeologist.
Well, I thought archaeologists were always funny little men searching for their mommies.
Mummies.
Who on earth is this Nurhachi?
Here he is. Welcome home, old boy.
And now, you give me the diamond.
Are you trying to develop a sense of humor, or am I going deaf?
What's that?
Antidote.
To what?
The poison you just drank, Dr. Jones.
Must drink, Dr. Jones.
Shut up! You sick! The antidote.
Where's the diamond?
Stay there!
I don't want to go! Who are you?
Wow, holy smoke! Crash landing!
Short round. Step on it.
Okie dokie, Dr. Jones, hold on to your potatoes!
Crying out loud, there's a kid driving the car!
Where's the antidote?
Listen, I just met
Let me
you, for
have it.
Christ's sakes!
Give me.
Oh, I'm not that kind of girl!
Hey, Dr. Jones, no time for love! We got company!
Oh, I hope you choke.
This is fun!
Here, hold it. Where's my gun? Where's my gun?
I burnt my fingers and I cracked a nail!
Oh, you did. Nice try, Lao Shay.
Goodbye, Dr. Jones.
So what are you supposed to be, a lion tamer?
I'm allowing you to tag along. So why don't you give your mouth a rest? Okay, doll?
What do you mean, tag along? Ever since you got into my club, you haven't been able to take your eyes off me.
Oh, yeah?
Jones, if memory serves me correctly, this area, this province, was the center of activity for the Thuggee.
Wow. Sneak. Surprise.
What's the surprise?
Chilled monkey brain.
I've got something for you.
There's nothing you have that I could possibly want.
Right.
Oh. Oh, you're a very nice man.
Wear your jewels to bed, princess?
Yeah? And nothing else. It shock you?
Nothing shocks me. I'm a scientist.
So as a scientist, you do a lot of research?
Always.
And what sort of research would you do on me?
Nocturnal activities.
You mean like what sort of cream I put on my face at night? What position I like to sleep in?
Mating customs.
Love rituals?
Primitive sexual practices.
So you're an authority in that area?
Years of field work. As a scientist, I don't want to prejudice my experiment. I'll let you know in the morning.
Why, you conceited ape. I'm not that easy.
I'm not that easy either. Trouble with you is, Willie, you're too used to getting your own way.
And you're just too proud to admit that you're crazy about me, Dr. Jones.
If you want me, Willie, you know where you can find me.
5 minutes. You'll be back over here in 5 minutes.
I'll be asleep in 5 minutes.
5. You know it, and I know it. Oh, Indy. Oh, be gentle with me. Be gentle with me. I'm here. Indy, you're acting awfully strange. Hey, I'm right here.
Howdy, how's it going? Thanks for joining me. My name's Zav, and so today we're talking about Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, a 1984 classic adventure movie directed by Steven Spielberg, produced by George Lucas, and starring Harrison Ford. And for me, this is definitely my favorite Indiana Jones movie. I know I'm in a minority there. I mean, I think there are many other people who agree with me, but gauging by online reviews, both written reviews on IMDb and Rotten Tomatoes and video reviews on YouTube, the vast majority tend to think that Raiders of the Lost Ark is a far superior movie, and even The Last Crusade. In terms of the timeline within the Indiana Jones franchise, it's considered a prequel. So it's the first Indiana Jones movie I watched, and as George Lucas intended, it was supposed to be a story that happened before Raiders of the Lost Ark. Anyway, I guess that's part of it for me, because your first impressions last. And unfortunately, I didn't watch this at a cinema. I watched it 1985 on TV, so I was 7 years old then. I wish I'd seen it at the cinema. Of course, there was some controversy about this movie, and it actually Steven Spielberg suggested to the ratings board that they change the ratings so that there would be something between PG, parental guidance, and R for adult movies. And so that's how they came up with a new rating system, PG-13. So it was actually Temple of Doom and Gremlins, which both came out in 1984. And I guess the sway of Spielberg's influence, which helped create this new rating system, PG-13. So yeah, if I had seen it in 1984 at the cinema, I guess by many people's reckoning, I would have been too young. But I watched it a year later at 7, and I guess I was too young then too. I mean, kids age differently, and what people can handle varies. For me, of course, some scenes go very, very dark, and Spielberg and George Lucas have mentioned that this is their least favorite, or least talking about the original trilogy. We've since had Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and then 2 years ago was Dial of Destiny. But referring to the original trilogy, both Spielberg and George Lucas were very clear that Temple of Doom was their least favorite, and that they were both in a dark place, especially George Lucas, because he was just going through a messy divorce, and I guess his wife or ex-wife, was taking him to the cleaners. And I think, why was Steven Spielberg in a dark mood? I mean, Spielberg was more complicated. But, he actually fell in love with his future wife in this movie. He wasn't divorced, but I think maybe he was separated or some marriage trouble. And so Kate Capshaw, who's the, love interest, Indy's love interest in the movie, she actually ended up marrying Spielberg. And Harrison Ford, I think Harrison Ford really loves this movie. So he's like the only one of the big three. I mean, let's say the big three are Spielberg, Lucas, and Harrison Ford. Without these three, Indiana Jones, as we know it, never would have come to be. I mean, they did actually initially cast Tom Selleck, and, I think Tom Selleck would have done a good job. I'm talking about, Raiders of the Lost Ark. So Tom Selleck was supposed to be Indiana Jones, and famously George Lucas was reluctant to cast Harrison Ford because he thought everyone would associate Ford with Han Solo, and of course everyone does associate Harrison Ford with Han Solo, but George Lucas was very reluctant. He didn't want to have a kind of Martin Scorsese, Robert De Niro thing going where, Ford was his go-to man in every movie. So yeah, the role went to Tom Selleck, and I guess he had to, well, not I guess, I mean, he was forced to drop out because the stingy producers of Magnum PI wouldn't let him have a few months off, and the cruel twist of fate for Tom Selleck anyway. I mean, for fans of Indiana Jones, I think everyone's happy that Harrison Ford ended up doing it. But, some people say nobody else could have been Indiana Jones, and it would have been different, but I think Tom Selleck would have done a great job as well. He's a different kind of actor, and some things would have worked not as well. Some things might have worked better. So the second year of production on Magnum PI, there was a writer's strike, and I think it was about 6 months where Tom Selleck couldn't work. He was like on standby, and they filmed Magnum PI in Hawaii, and they filmed part of Raiders of the Lost Ark in Hawaii. Especially definitely that opening sequence was, I know, filmed on Kauai. Yeah, I think Tom Selleck could have been a very good Indiana Jones. But getting back to the big three, so, this became one of the most legendary film franchises in movie history. Maybe soured somewhat with the last two movies. I mean, both Spielberg and Lucas were on board with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which came out in 2008, so 17 years ago. But that movie, was somewhat disappointing to many fans of the original trilogy. And, the thing is, we know that Spielberg intended to end on The Last Crusade. That's why you have that scene of them riding off into the sunset on horseback in, I think, well, they filmed it in Jordan. It's a well-known fact that, Spielberg, he wanted to end the series on The Last Crusade, which came out in 1989, and things sort of came full circle there because you had, both George Lucas and Spielberg, they were partly inspired by James Bond, and so that's why you have the opening sequence, the Temple of Doom, where, Indy is dressed in a white tuxedo, looking like Sean Connery from Dr. No, or is it Thunderball? There's a famous scene where he goes to like a club, and so, yeah, the opening to Temple of Doom, very much a nod to James Bond. So, yeah, well-known fact that Indiana Jones partly inspired by James Bond, also largely inspired by the serials, the adventure serials that Lucas and Spielberg grew up on back in, was it the 40s or 50s? But yeah, basically things came full circle in The Last Crusade because they were able to, get Sean Connery, the original James Bond, to play Indy's father, and that went incredibly well. So they always say it's better to quit while you're ahead and end on a high, and The Last Crusade was definitely a high. For me personally, Temple of Doom is my favorite, as I say, but Last Crusade also incredible movie, and it's a different kind of movie. So if you're talking about, it's not a buddy cop, but the buddy cop genre is a very popular movie genre where you have, this kind of opposites who, a lot of friction, but also great banter. And so The Last Crusade is almost like a buddy cop movie, except that it's father and son. Actually, only 12 years difference between Harrison Ford and Sean Connery. I think Harrison Ford was in his late 40s then. Was he 46 maybe? So, and then Sean Connery was 58 or something. But maybe I'll talk about The Last Crusade another time. I'm getting off track as usual. So the point is that, at least from Spielberg's perspective, he wanted to end it with The Last Crusade. And I think this is partly how Lucas sold it to Spielberg. So when George Lucas was, pitching the idea of Indiana Jones to Spielberg, he basically asked him to do a 3-picture deal. So it seems that they intended to make 3 movies only. The only one of the big 3, so I keep saying the big 3. In tennis, the big 3 refers to Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic, but in the Indiana Jones world, the big 3, this is a term I'm just coming up with, is George Lucas. He's the one who came up with the idea initially. He's the producer, executive producer, and came up with the storylines for the majority of the storylines for the first 4 movies anyway. And Spielberg, he's the director. So those are the big 2, and then Harrison Ford. He's an iconic actor, living legend. Han Solo, Indiana Jones, Deckard from Blade Runner, one of the greatest, one of the most successful and beloved actors in film history. Interestingly, he's never won an Academy Award. I guess he's been nominated a couple of times, but Sean Connery finally got an Academy Award for The Untouchables. And even Short Round, who's in the Temple of Doom, his sidekick sort of adopted kid, Short Round, played by Huy Quan. Sorry if I've mispronounced that. He's had a real renaissance in recent years, or a great comeback, reconnaissance. Well, what's the term we could come up for him? Short round assance? No, that doesn't quite ring. Huy Quanaissance. Yeah, he won an Academy Award for Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, which came out 3 years ago. And that's kind of a legendary story in its own right, because famously, he sort of dropped out of movies and gave up. He was in these monster hit movies back to back in 84 and 85, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. And, for me, Short Round is the most memorable, kid actor, kid character in any movie ever. There have been lots of kids who've been in many, many movies, and, people remember Macaulay Culkin from Home Alone, And the little girl who played Annie in the original Annie, she was memorable. I mean, the kids in E.T., Drew Barrymore was in E.T. So many kids have been in many legendary movies over the years, but for me personally, Short Round, the greatest kid character, and acting by any child, any movie that I can think of. And then he was in The Goonies in 1985. So these were two monster hits. And then he kind of dropped out for many, many years. I mean, he had a few bit roles, like Encino Man, that was 92. There's a big gap there, 7 years. And then he was in this movie Finding Ohana, which came out 2021. So I guess that was kind of the start of his comeback. So yeah, he was basically out of the movies for, almost 30 years. It's crazy. 30 years, totally gave up on acting anyway. I mean, he done some stunt coordination for X-Men movie and The One, that's starring Jean-Claude Van Damme. And yeah, he'd done some other work, but as an actor, he basically out of the business for 30 years, and then he's made this incredible comeback and won an Oscar. So, Sean Connery won an Oscar. Ke Huy Quan had his renaissance in recent years, but Harrison Ford, no Academy Award for him. I mean, honestly, I think Harrison Ford probably deserved an Academy Award for Mosquito Coast, that Mosquito Coast, which came out in 1986. I guess it's somewhat understandable that the Mosquito Coast didn't do well financially because people love to see Harrison Ford as a hero. He'd been this iconic hero as Han Solo in 3 Star Wars movies, the original trilogy that's, still lauded today. Recent Star Wars movies have significantly soured the fan base on that. I love those original Star Wars movies, largely because I love the Han Solo character, but I always loved Chewbacca and Luke Skywalker and Princess Leia. They were all very well done, but I wasn't heavily invested in the Star Wars thing. So that's why what's happened in recent years, it's not a big deal to me, but I do, I pay attention to what people are talking about, and I loved the characters in Star Wars, but I wasn't a big fan of the whole world building in Star Wars. That's why, when the George Lucas, he came back with his prequel trilogy, with starting with The Phantom Menace, I wasn't that excited about that. And then when they rebooted the Star Wars, when Lucas sold it to Disney and they came back with The Force Awakens in 2015, I wasn't overly invested in that. But I did enjoy The Force Awakens, especially because it was so cool to see Harrison Ford back as Han Solo, although it was a real gut punch to see him literally stabbed in the stomach by his son, Kylo Ren. And I guess it lent some dramatic weight to the movie. And I know that Harrison Ford, he only agreed to come back to the Star Wars franchise if they killed off his character, because he thought that would be appropriately give the movie some weight. And I guess he didn't want to be involved in a whole bunch of new movies. He was, kind of a one and done deal. He was happy to come back, but it wasn't maybe so much the fact that he died, but the way he died, it just seemed rather unceremonious. And so, I enjoyed The Force Awakens, but seeing my favorite character from the original trilogy stabbed in the stomach by his own son and dying the way he did, that was rather disappointing. So yeah, getting off track again. I wasn't invested in Star Wars, but I was heavily invested in Indiana Jones. And so I understand why audiences weren't too thrilled to see Harrison Ford in The Mosquito Coast in 1986, which, objectively, I guess always with movies everything is subjective, but if you are dissecting a movie and looking at the performance and the dramatic weight of a performance. I think that The Mosquito Coast is Harrison Ford's best movie. Certainly one that he could have, should have won an Academy Award for. I'm not sure who won Best Actor in 1986 when that came out, but it's interesting to me that Sean Connery finally got his Academy Award, and Short Round finally got his Academy Award, even though he was out of the movie business for 30 years. And Harrison Ford's been in movies since the 1960s and one of the most beloved actors ever, but no Academy Award for him. A little bit like Cary Grant. I mean, they gave Cary Grant an honorary Academy Award, to sort of celebrate his career, but not really appreciated. I mean, he was appreciated. There's obviously a difference between the critics' favorites and then the audience favorites. So the last movie I talked about was To Catch a Thief. So in some regards, Harrison Ford reminds me of Cary Grant in that, he's been incredibly popular, incredibly successful, and but on one level his acting hasn't been appreciated. But these days the Academy Awards have lost a lot of their clout. Considering Indiana Jones is all about archaeology and history, the basic themes, it is somewhat surprising that Temple of Doom is the only Indiana Jones movie to really spend time in Asia. So, it's set in China and in India. But of the other 4 Indiana Jones movies, I think there's only one other brief scene that's set in Asia, and that's with the Kathmandu scenes in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where Indy catches up with Marion Ravenwood. So she's running a bar in Kathmandu, and there's a snowstorm, but you don't really get a sense of Asia in that movie at all, because it's just this exotic bar and this snowstorm, and they don't spend much time outside there, so you don't really get to feel the vibe of Nepal. But Temple of Doom, 100% set in Asia, and mostly filmed in Asia. They did film the indoor scenes in, I think, the Pinehurst Studios in the UK. I feel it's rather odd and quite a missed opportunity that we've had 5 Indiana Jones movies, but only one of them has really spent time in Asia, considering the amazing history, in China, India, Thailand, Japan, so many Indonesia, so many parts of Asia that would have been, Cambodia, Angkor Wat, which was used in Tomb Raider, and Tomb Raider, of course, inspired by Indiana Jones. They could have done that. Definitely, it seems to me a lost opportunity that Indiana Jones movies haven't spent more time in Asia. And another lost opportunity for me is the 1990s. So there was this 19-year gap between The Last Crusade and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. As I said earlier, Spielberg intended to end on The Last Crusade, so that was his, mission accomplished. I'm not exactly sure why he came back for Kingdom of the Crystal Skull if he was reluctant. Maybe it was just the pressure from the fans, or maybe it was about the money. Well, I guess he did enjoy working with Harrison Ford and George Lucas, but, Spielberg didn't come back for Dial of Destiny. And so in hindsight, if they'd gone with a different director in the 90s, I think George Lucas was more interested in coming back to Indiana Jones, and definitely Harrison Ford was. So yeah, you have this, especially I mentioned the 1990s because, well, it was actually, almost a 20-year gap. Almost a 20-year gap. And that was basically, still peak Harrison Ford in terms of his physicality. If he was in action movies, he was in action movies in the 90s. The Fugitive came out in 93. He was excellent in The Fugitive, one of his best movies. Air Force One came out in 1997. That was a big hit, and and he was the kick-ass president. And then one of my favorite Harrison Ford movies, 6 Days, 7 Nights, which I reviewed last week. So if you're interested, if you like Harrison Ford, if you like, adventure movies, definitely check out my review on 6 Days, 7 Nights. I appreciate the fact that Harrison Ford has always been enthusiastic about Indiana Jones. So, he got rather emotional when they had I think the first screening of Dial of Destiny at the Cannes Movie Festival 2 years ago. When he was talking about it, you could see his emotion come out. So the point is that Harrison Ford has always loved playing Indy, and that's great. As a fan of Harrison Ford, as a fan of Indiana Jones, you want to see your favorite actor in his most legendary role enjoying himself. So even if Spielberg or Lucas lost interest, Lucas sold out to Disney, and I don't know exactly why he sold out. Maybe $4 billion is one reason. He got a ridiculous amount of money to sell his catalog of movies to Disney. But also maybe the backlash he got over the Star Wars prequels, which were received rather badly when they came out. But now, in retrospect, because of the rebooted Star Wars movies have been hated on even more, people are now going back and actually looking at the Star Wars prequels with fond memories. So, for whatever reason, Lucas and Spielberg, especially Spielberg, lost interest in the Indiana Jones movies, but Harrison Ford never did. The last two movies, just way too long a gap. And then Harrison Ford, he's 83 years old now. I guess he was 81 when Dial of Destiny came out. He is, an old man, but, very healthy for an old man. And you're lucky to be alive because he crashed his plane 10 years ago on some golf course in Beverly Hills. I mentioned that in my review of 6 Days, 7 Nights, because in that movie, he crashes his plane, filmed in Hawaii, but set in Tahiti or somewhere near there. And also, that was a theme connecting with the Indiana Jones movies, because, he can't fly a plane. Well, he says in The Last Crusade, when his Sean Connery says to him, can you fly a plane? He says, fly, yes, land, no. So there's this kind of running joke that he can't land a plane. And then in Temple of Doom, when they hop on the cargo plane and cross over the Great Wall of China, Willie Scott, played by Kate Capshaw, when she realizes the plane's about to crash, she says, she wakes him up and says, you know how to fly a plane, don't you? And he says, no, you? So this is one of the reasons that I kind of connect 6 Days, 7 Nights with the Indiana Jones franchise. I'm really disappointed that they didn't make an Indiana Jones movie in the 1990s when Harrison Ford was still in peak form. But if you're like me and you wish that there'd been a movie between The Last Crusade and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull in that 20 years or so, then, and if you haven't watched 6 Days, 7 Nights, definitely check it out. That's sort of in my mind, that's the Indiana Jones 4. And I actually prefer 6 Days, 7 Nights than Kingdom of the Crystal Skull and Dial of Destiny, because the romance is much better, mostly practical effects, mostly real jungle. I love to see, Indy in the jungle. And another reason why Temple of Doom is my favorite Indiana Jones movie, because, they're traipsing through the jungle in India, actually filmed in Sri Lanka. We'll get into that later. But, the fact that it's set in Asia. So definitely a big lost opportunity that we never had an Indiana Jones movie in the 1990s, and we didn't have any other Indiana Jones movies set in Asia, not even, aside from that brief scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark where he catches up with Marion Ravenwood but that could be anywhere. So it's just a bar in a snowstorm. If you love something too much, it's very hard to try to be objective, and it's also hard to articulate, why. I mean, with movies, it's basically how they make you feel. So even if you can't justify, logically or whatever, why a movie works, you just like it or you don't like it. And in the case of Temple of Doom, I love it. I love the characters. I love pretty much every scene. I love the dialogue. I love Short Round, the relationship between Indy and Short Round. I love the relationship between Indy and Willie Scott. I love the relationship between Willie Scott and Short Round. I love the villains. I mean, well, I don't love the villains, but they're great villains. They're scary villains, which villains are supposed to be, especially Mologram. And the stunts are unbelievable. I love the fact that it's mostly practical effects. It's so outrageous. I love the romance. I love that it's so original and so different from Raiders. One criticism, even people who love The Last Crusade, is they kind of accept that it is a bit of a retread of the Raiders of the Lost Ark. And so, it's kind of crazy that they took so many risks. I love the risk taking. I think in recent years, there are other people that are coming around to my way of thinking, that Temple of Doom is an underrated movie, or is underrated, underappreciated. I mean, it's just criticized too much. And, I do have criticisms of my own, but I've listened to several other reviews, and I mean, when you think about it, some of the most iconic Indiana Jones scenes come from Temple of Doom. People say that the movie is, they say that it's too dark, but it's also too lightweight. I mean, I guess that's an oxymoron. Too lightweight, they say story-wise, but too dark. I can see what they mean in terms of too dark to a degree. So, okay, let's get to some of the criticisms. Probably if I were the editor, I mean, I'm not saying I could do a better job editing. Of course not. I can barely edit my own videos. So, but I think maybe the scenes in the Temple of Doom, in the Death Cult, I think they drag on a little bit. And there's a scene where they rip a man's heart out and he's still alive, and Moloram has his heart in his hand. Yeah, I probably would have cut that scene, and I might have cut out 5 minutes around that point in the movie. Most of the movie is, breakneck, kind of roller coaster. You can barely stop to catch your breath. And, especially the first 30 minutes of the movie, probably my favorite 30 minutes of, movie magic, any movie, anytime. It's just unbelievable. You've got this magical opening with the dance number, the musical number, and then you see Shanghai 1935 come up on the screen. But actually they filmed in Macau, and I forgot the reason why. I know they didn't film in India because the government of India, they gave Spielberg and Lucas too many notes. Apparently someone said to Lucas, I don't think you're going to be able to film in India because this is going to be very offensive to, the Indian people, and, the whole death cult thing, and, the chilled monkey brain, the banquet scene where they have all those animals that they're eating, and very disgusting. And so, if you're from India, or if you're Hindu religion, it's understandable that those scenes would be somewhat or very offensive. I don't know enough about Hinduism to know, but someone said to Lucas that you're probably not going to be allowed to film this in India. And he said, don't worry about it. This is me and Spielberg. This is me. That they'll definitely let us, because by this stage, Spielberg had done Jaws, and Lucas had made Star Wars. So these movies also, successful worldwide, and many fans in India. So I guess it's understandable that Lucas was a bit cocky then, just coming off the success of Star Wars. But yeah, they assumed that it would be no problem to film in India. And maybe they could have filmed in India. So the government of India, they didn't say, no, you cannot. They basically kept revising the script. So they said, rejig this scene, cut this out. Who knows what notes they were given. I'm sure part of it was, cut out that banquet scene, or at least cut up the most disgusting aspects. Like, at one point, Willie Scott is served up a bowl of, eyeball soup. And I assume the Indian government wouldn't have been too keen on that scene. So it's fairly common for governments or countries to give notes on how they want movies to be filmed. And 2 movies ago, last week I reviewed Entrapment, and even though the Malaysian government was very keen on Sean Connery and Catherine Zeta-Jones filming Entrapment in Malaysia. Originally, it was supposed to be filmed in Hong Kong. They rejigged the story to make it around the Y2K bug, 1999, end of the millennium. But curiously, the Malaysian government really wanted them to film that movie there, so they gave them, tax benefits, and gave them free rein to film pretty much anywhere around Kuala Lumpur and I think other locations around Malaysia. But after the film came out, the Malaysian government was very critical and very disappointed that the director and producers, they'd used scenes from Malacca, and Malacca is a city that's, I guess, about 100 kilometers south of Kuala Lumpur. So you have these, canal scenes, and they'd sort of cut and paste scenes of the canals in Malacca and this kind of like slummy area where the hideout where Connery and Zeta-Jones are staking out the Petronas Towers in Kuala Lumpur. So you have the Petronas Towers in the background and these canals in Malacca in the foreground. So kind of a dodgy cut and paste scene there. I actually like it, because this is part of movie magic. We don't expect movies to be documentaries, and I think it actually makes, Kuala Lumpur look more mysterious. I've been to Malacca, I've been to Kuala Lumpur, and, if they'd filmed that in Bangkok, you probably could have done that without the copy and paste, because Bangkok's full of these rivers and canals, and you probably could have had a foreground scene with a beautiful river and then the background with skyscrapers. But it's interesting that, sometimes governments, they give the green light and they encourage movies to film in certain cities, but then later they criticize the movie, as happened in Entrapment. So in the case of Temple of Doom, it seems like the government of India, they were happy for an Indiana Jones movie to be filmed in India, but they wanted to, have... They wanted to edit certain scenes or have certain scenes rewritten to, be less offensive. Understandable. So basically, what happened was Spielberg and Lucas, they kept getting these notes, and at some point, Spielberg just said, enough of this. They're being a pain in the ass, so we're going to film somewhere else. So they filmed in Sri Lanka. So yeah, one of the reasons Temple of Doom is so personal to me and will always be at the top of my, movie list is because it really got me fascinated with Asia. And as I said, I live in Japan now, and I actually ended up marrying a Japanese lady. And, a lot of my best friends, my best friend in primary school was from Taiwan. I met him in grade 5. I was like 11 years old. So that was in 1989 when The Last Crusade came out. But for me, like the scenes in Shanghai, actually Macau, and the scenes in India, actually Sri Lanka, it was just so exotic and just looked so much fun. And so 6 years ago, I finally traveled to Sri Lanka. And, I was interested in traveling to Sri Lanka anyway because I'd seen YouTube videos where people go on, elephant safaris, and safaris where you look for wild elephants. So Sri Lanka has many national parks full of wild elephants. And if you want to see Asian elephants in their natural state, I definitely recommend Sri Lanka. And, they've got these amazing ruins like Sigiriya, this amazing Sugiria, these amazing like tabletop mountain rock formation that rises out of the kind of savanna jungle, and there's this ancient city built on top of it. So yeah, I finally traveled to Sri Lanka 6 years ago, and I think it's always been in the back of my mind that I wanted to travel to Sri Lanka because I knew that's where they filmed Temple of Doom. And when I went to Macau, first traveled to Macau 16 years ago, and I just spent one day in Macau, but I basically from morning to night walking around the city all day. And I kept thinking, I wonder if this is one of the back streets where they filmed that car chase scene with Short Round, getting out of Club Obi-Wan to the airport, knowing that they actually filmed somewhere around there. So who knows? Without Temple of Doom, I might never have traveled. I mean, I probably would have, but I say that because, my parents, they're not big on travel. I mean, there are other movies that also had an influence. I guess The Karate Kid also somewhat got me interested in Asia. Of course, Mr. Miyagi, he's this kind of wise Yoda figure. And even though the first Karate Kid was, set and filmed in Los Angeles, but then the second Karate Kid movie was set in Okinawa, actually filmed in Hawaii. But, when I was a kid, I didn't, we didn't have Wikipedia, we didn't have YouTube, we didn't have the internet when as a child. So you assumed that things that were shown to you in movies were, even though you know that it's movie magic, it's not real, but you assume at least that the locations are real. And so in Temple of Doom, the locations, they're not completely real, of course. There is a bit of green screen and there's miniature models, but the movies, it felt real, for one, because, parts of the movie are very real. The car chase in Macau is real. The Indy and Short Round and Willie Scott riding the elephants in the jungle, that's real. And the minecart chase, even though most of it is miniatures, those miniatures are tangible, they're real. They're not, it's not CGI. And that's part of the movie magic. I think many people, they prefer the old adventure movies. And I think like Temple of Doom is kind of the sweet spot where technology had moved forward enough that they could make a movie like this, but still it was mostly practical effects, I mean, maybe Jurassic Park, that's another movie that's mentioned by lovers of adventure movies as kind of the peak of adventure movie making. So in the last 30 years, especially the last 10 to 15 years, so many adventure, fantasy kind of movies, action movies, just the uncanny valley aspect. I mean, even though the visuals that they can create now, I mean, a good example of that is Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. You have the scene where Shia LaBeouf, Mutt, Indy's son, is Tarzaning through the jungle with the monkeys, and that completely takes many people out of the movie. And then you have the nuke the fridge scene, and listening to other people talk about that scene, it's not so much that the fridge, being blown up in a nuclear bomb and Indy surviving it. It's not so much that is jumping the shark. Maybe what it is the fact that, you've got CGI on top of CGI. And so, yeah, in the original Indiana Jones trilogy, they didn't have that kind of technology. They had to work with what they had, and it's much more tangible, just like this is very tangible. And I think for people who grew up on those kind of movies, our eye can kind of detect when something is not there. Maybe for younger generations, Gen Z, if they're playing computer games and they've got their Twitch, their Switch, whatever. Sorry, I don't play computer games. If they're used to, smartphone zombie looking at their screens constantly, maybe their eyes can't detect the difference. But for me, I feel like there's a big difference with the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull and Dial of Destiny with the CGI scenes. It just takes me out of it a bit. And, I can also understandable these days, it's not only that it's maybe cheaper to make movies with CGI, it's the safety factor, so they did take big risks. Harrison Ford severely injured his back in Temple of Doom, so they almost shut down production. They did, second production unit. They kept filming stuff without him and with his stunt double. So I think like most of those minecart chase sequences, you don't see Harrison Ford's face much in those scenes because it was mostly done with his stunt double, and that was mostly why he was recovering from back surgery, because during the playful will they won't they bedroom scenes between Indy and Willie Scott, there's a scene where Indy's attacked from behind. This scary kind of guy comes out of the matte painting, comes alive and tries to strangle him, and eventually Indy strangles him with his whip. But then that guy gets jumped on Harrison Ford's back, and a very heavy guy, and then Harrison Ford severely damaged his back. I mean, that kind of scene wouldn't be done with CGI, but what I'm talking about is that back in the 1980s, actors, took big risks, and still today you've got Tom Cruise. He's like Jackie Chan. He's in his 60s, but he's hanging off airplanes and jumping off ledges on buildings, and this is part of the selling point for the Mission Impossible series, that Tom Cruise does most of his own stunts. But yeah, that's one reason that these days that they're reluctant to do as much practical effects, because too much danger. Romancing the Stone, that also came out in 1984. That's another movie where Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner got severely injured. Michael Douglas, apparently he got whacked by an alligator tail and he nearly passed out, or he did pass out, and that alligator, which was supposed to be a crocodile. I mean, most of the crocodiles in Romancing the Stone were crocodiles, but there's the one scene where he's wrestling a crocodile that was actually an alligator, and that whacked him with its powerful tail. Crocodiles, alligators, the tails are incredibly powerful, all muscle, and Michael Douglas says that he passed out or knocked him out. And also one of the crocodile alligator trainers, because in Romancing the Stone they had both crocodiles and alligators, and in Temple of Doom there's a great crocodile scene at the rope bridge scene where they're Mola Ram is eaten by a crocodile, but actually those were all alligators. So two of my favorite adventure movies, both came out in 1984, and the most dangerous thing that happened was Harrison Ford suffering severe back injury, and he had to have, emergency back surgery. So he flew back from, I think, Sri Lanka back to New York or somewhere in America to get this emergency back surgery. And he was out of action for about a month. And so very, very nearly shut down production, but they were able to filmed some stuff without him. Vic Armstrong. I just looked him up. So Vic Armstrong famously played Harrison Ford's stunt double through the Indiana Jones movies. And I just see now that he's 78 years old, Harrison Ford 83. So when they filmed Temple of Doom, I think Harrison Ford was in his early 40s and Vic Armstrong would have been in his late 30s. I mean, I guess who cares, getting lost in the weeds, but you know, a lot of the amazing stunt work done, you know, the incredible physical stuff, props to Vic Armstrong. And so during the minecart chase sequences and all that, a lot of the action there with a punch scene with a heavy and, you know, the voodoo doll stuff and the strangling, I guess that was largely Vic Armstrong. So props to him for being, you know, maybe the greatest stunt double in movie history. And if you see Harrison Ford and Vic Armstrong side by side in the, you know, Indiana Jones classic outfit, you know, the cargo pants and the leather jacket and the fedora hat and everything, you know, they're about the same height. And so Vic Armstrong did a great job covering for Harrison Ford while Harrison Ford was recovering from his back surgery. Somewhat miraculous that Harrison Ford recovered so well as he did from that back surgery. You know, so that's 40. They filmed in 83, so 42 years ago. And I don't know if he's mentioned it again. I mean, it was obviously very debilitating at the time. But I mean, Harrison Ford, he's always been very physical and he's always had an amazing physique. And you know, he survived a severe plane crash in 2015, so 10 years ago. He was 73 years old when he had that. He was flying a plane solo in Beverly Hills, I think it was, or somewhere around there, and he crashed his plane in the golf course. A bit like the scene you see with you know, Howard Hughes in the Aviator, Scorsese movie. So DiCaprio playing Howard Hughes crash lands his plane in Beverly Hills. So something like that happened to Harrison Ford, and not only did he survive, I think he had some broken bones, but you know, he recovered amazingly well. So they filmed Blade Runner 2049. I think it was, you know, less than a year after Harrison Ford's plane crash. And I'm thinking, why has Harrison Ford recovered so well from his back surgery? How did he recover so well from that plane crash? I would say part of the reason is, you know, he's always been incredibly fit, and he's always had, you know, great muscles. And I'm not talking about Dwayne Johnson or Arnold Schwarzenegger muscles. I'm talking about, you know, athletic, you know, practical muscles. So these days, you know, you see with a lot of these action heroes, I mean, the most obvious example is Dwayne Johnson, because, you know, he was a wrestler, but, you know, Dwayne Johnson, he's even more jacked now than he was when he was a, you know, WWE wrestler, and he's surely taking some kind of steroids. I mean, that kind of body can't be natural. Schwarzenegger, I think, has admitted to steroids. Sylvester Stallone's breakout role was Rocky, and I don't know if he took steroids then. He definitely took steroids later with the Rambo movies. I mean, he actually got, when they came back with 2008, there was a Rambo movie. Yeah, 2008 Rambo. So that was kind of like Stallone's Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. So he came back, there was, yeah, very similar timelines. You had Last Crusade, 1989. Then they come back with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull 19 years later. And I think there was a 20-year gap with the Rambo movies too. So Rambo 3, I think, was 1988. So yeah, 1 year before Last Crusade. Anyway, Sylvester Stallone came back as Rambo in 2008. And then he was promoting the movie in Sydney. He was, you know, going around the world on a promo tour. And, you know, he basically got caught with a bag of needles, a bag of steroids in his hotel room. They were doing some random inspection. And he actually, like, dumped his bag of needles off the balcony from his hotel window. So I don't think he ever went to prison. Maybe he had to pay some kind of fine, but maybe until that stage, maybe Stallone had never admitted to taking steroids, but it was very obvious that he had. So again, I'm getting off track. What I wanted to say is Harrison Ford had the best physique of any action hero that I can think of, and the peak of Harrison Ford's, physical awesomeness is clear in the Temple of Doom. Another reason why Temple of Doom is, Harrison Ford's best Indiana Jones movie. So, at the end of the movie, he has his shirt ripped off, famously the rope bridge scene where they used a real rope bridge, and, I actually went to the area where they filmed that, but now that's, unfortunately, those amazing cliffs, where the rope bridge was, it was a cable bridge, but they sort of covered the cables, steel cables, with rope. That's all being covered with water now, so that's a dam. Indian village scene in Mayapur was actually filmed near Kandy. Kandy, if you're interested in Buddhism, Kandy, K-A-N-D-Y, so not C, Kandy. Kandy is a very spiritual place for Buddhists because they have the Temple of the Tooth, the Buddhist tooth in Kandy. And I actually witnessed the Perahera. This is a festival where they use elephants, and they have, amazing fire dances. So you appreciate, again, the movie magic, how they transformed this tea plantation into the village. But still, just, walking around that area and knowing that, Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones, that's where he met the shaman, and that's where he got on the elephant, and the end of the movie is filmed there, the happy ending, where he and Willie Scott and Short Round come back with Shankara stones, and the enslaved children come back, and it's all amazing. So for me, very, very special moments to actually go back to that location. Generally it's explained that the Indian government wouldn't let them film there, but technically that's not true. The government of India were happy for them to film Indiana Jones there. They just wanted some power to, edit out certain scenes, and Spielberg and Lucas, they got fed up with all the notes. As for why they didn't film in Shanghai, I'm not exactly sure. I don't know if the Chinese government wouldn't let them film there. I mean, now, of course, Macau is officially part of China, but back in 1983, when they filmed Temple of Doom, Macau was still a Portuguese colony. I think it was 1996 or 1997 that Macau was officially returned to China. The Portuguese government handed it back, similar to Hong Kong being handed back to China by the British government. Why they filmed in Macau, not exactly sure. It might have been just that Spielberg and the producers felt that Macau in the early 1980s looked more like how they wanted how they believed Shanghai looked in 1935. Sometimes directors make these kind of decisions. Another example is Martin Scorsese. He made a movie, Silence, which came out in 2017, and that was set in Japan in the 18th century, was it? And they didn't film in Japan because apparently they couldn't get the locations they wanted, without power lines, and it didn't look quite right, so they actually filmed in Taiwan. I'm somewhat reluctant to criticize Temple of Doom just because plenty of other people have criticized Temple of Doom without me having to jump on the bandwagon, and among them Spielberg, who seems he's not a big fan of the movie. I assume there are aspects. I mean, during the making of Temple of Doom, there's a retrospective interviews with the cast of Temple of Doom. I think this was for like the DVD Blu-ray when they released it, 20 years ago or something. And Spielberg, he's quite critical of Temple of Doom, but he does mention that, the one good thing was that he met Kate Capshaw and they got married and, happily ever after for them. So it's kind of disappointing that Spielberg doesn't understand the masterpiece. I mean, it's almost a masterpiece in my opinion that he created, because he's talked about the movie being too dark and he didn't really like the story, and I guess the story was kind of pushed on him by George Lucas, and I think it's no secret that the two Indiana Jones movies that were very personal to Spielberg were Raiders of the Lost Ark and The Last Crusade, and they're both kind of the villains are Nazis in both those movies, and they're kind of a Jewish revenge story on them, and Spielberg himself is Jewish, so it's understandable that those movies will be more personal to him. Sometimes when things are too precious to you, you can kind of be too much of a control freak. I mean, I was reluctant to do this movie review because I love Temple of Doom too much, and I think maybe Spielberg, he put a lot of pressure on himself to get Raiders of the Lost Ark right, and especially because of the success of Raiders of the Lost Ark, he put a lot of pressure on himself to finish the trilogy in the perfect way, and why The Last Crusade is so personal to him, and that's why he's got that scene of them riding off into the sunset, the four of them. A large reason why I think Spielberg wanted to end the trilogy with The Last Crusade was that, he went out on his terms and made exactly the movie he wanted to make. And again, you've got the revenge fantasy, Jewish revenge fantasy against the Nazis. I mean, everyone hated the Nazis, so it's not only Jewish, but it so happens that Spielberg is Jewish, so that was a part of it. And, there's a scene in Last Crusade where Harrison Ford's Indy comes face to face with Hitler, and that scene was played amazingly. That's incredible because, at first, the shock of face to face with Hitler and, oh my God, it's all over. And then ingeniously, they kind of mock Hitler's ego, because Hitler assumes that anyone in front of him must want the autograph, and so they hand Indy's father's diary with all the codes and information about the Last Crusade, all the key information, and hands it to him, and then Hitler just signs it like Indiana Jones is some kind of fanboy. That was incredible. But the final shot of The Last Crusade, you have Harrison Ford, Indy, Sean Connery as Henry Jones Sr., and you have John Rhys Davies as Salah, one of his good friends who also comes back in Dial of Destiny, and Denholm Elliott, Marcus Brody. So you have the four of them riding off into the sunset. And it seems that because Spielberg wasn't heavily invested, he didn't feel a personal connection with the Temple of Doom, the whole death cult, child slavery thing, that was all George Lucas's idea. In some regard, he was kind of half-assing it, He didn't have his heart in it with Temple of Doom. But maybe that made Temple of Doom a better movie. So during the dialogue scenes and the there are several scenes where they're, especially like at the banquet scene, they're discussing the history and of the Maharaja and the colonialism, and then with the the cult, the rumors of the cult. By that stage, we haven't actually seen the death cult, we've just heard about it. And, while that's going on, you have this crazy sequence where Willie Scott and Short Round, they're reacting to all this disgusting food, which, as I said, definitely I can understand if that's offensive to Indian people or Hindus. But nod to the fact that Spielberg probably didn't have his heart in it, and how it actually makes the movie better, in my opinion, because he felt the movie was too dark, and so he had to sprinkle in humor wherever he could. And so Temple of Doom really works as a comedy. I mean, of course, there are humorous moments in all the Indiana Jones movies, even Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and even Dial of Destiny. There is humor there, and some of the jokes land, some of the jokes don't land. And of course, The Last Crusade, incredible humorous banter, which really makes The Last Crusade great, in my opinion, is mostly thanks to the father-son relationship. If Sean Connery wasn't in The Last Crusade, I think that movie would be much more criticized as a retread, of Raiders of the Lost Ark, just as The Force Awakens is, rightfully criticized as a retread of the original Star Wars. So because Raiders of the Lost Ark was such a huge success, I mean, he knew that he wanted to make 3 movies. Okay, so give him credit for that. But basically when he came back to Spielberg and said, okay, so we're going to make this sequel, prequel, and, what ideas have you got? They're kind of brainstorming. And so George Lucas said, I'm thinking about this, death cult thing in, India. And so seems like, but he was also, at the same time, he had another idea about a haunted mansion thing in Scotland. And apparently they were reworking that with, the third Indiana Jones movie, which they totally changed it in the end. So it looks like Spielberg had his way with The Last Crusade. That's the movie he wanted to make. Temple of Doom, more George Lucas's choice to go super dark. But Spielberg, he wasn't that keen on the idea. But, I guess he enjoyed Indiana Jones enough to, make the movie. And by that stage, I think he was contractually obliged. He signed a 3-picture deal with Lucas. But I feel like, Temple of Doom is kind of a happy accident. Happy accident in that, as I said before, the Dunning-Kruger effect. Spielberg underestimates how good the movie is, and maybe he doesn't quite understand why so many Indiana Jones fans love this movie the most. And I just think he underrates it, and many critics underrate it. But, if the director of the movie is going to kind of overly criticize the movie, no wonder, critics will also be overly critical. Credit to Lucas for kind of pushing through with his idea to have this death cult, child slave labor cult thing as a key component of the story in Temple of Doom. But I think credits to Spielberg for making some changes. So from what I heard, this is according to, other movie reviewers and other people that have, gone deeper, more in depth on Temple of Doom. Apparently, George Lucas, he wanted the child sidekick to be like a, teenage virginal princess. And yeah, that would have been creepy. Good thing they didn't go with that idea. So bringing in Short Round, this was part of the magic. This is credit to Spielberg for, choosing Huy Quan. And this was, happy accident. Just as it was a happy accident that Harrison Ford got the role of Han Solo, and if Harrison Ford hadn't been Han Solo, and he wouldn't have, most likely he wouldn't have got the job as Indiana Jones. And it was a happy accident that, Harrison Ford became Indiana Jones, because it should have been Tom Selleck who got cast in the movie. But sadly for Tom Selleck, the producers of Magnum PI were so stingy that they wouldn't let him film Raiders of the Lost Ark. Would have been Tom Selleck could have done both. There's absolutely no reason why Tom Selleck couldn't have been Indiana Jones. He was in a movie in 1983, High Road to China. So that came out a year after Raiders of the Lost Ark. And High Road to China is very, very much, Raiders of the Lost Ark kind of rip-off or inspired by a movie that was, greenlit in the wake of the success of Raiders of the Lost Ark. And so no coincidence that they cast Tom Selleck. They no doubt they couldn't get Harrison Ford for that one, but they got the Indiana Jones that wasn't allowed to be Indiana Jones. And in High Road to China, that movie also had Rick Young, a Malaysian actor who played Lao Che's son in the Temple of Doom. So there's that amazing scene in the Club Obi-Wan, of course, a nod to Star Wars. That was a George Lucas inside joke, naming Club Obi-Wan. So that amazing scene at the beginning of the movie where Indy hands over the remains of Nurhaci, but Lao Che's son is very offended because Lao Che's son and Indy had already had some confrontation where Lao Che's son had tried to steal the Nurhaci remains prior to the meetup in the club. But that's amazing coinkydink that you got High Road to China starring Tom Selleck and also starring Rick Young. So you find that like a lot of these actors, the actors playing Chinese, the actors playing Indians, they appeared in many, many other famous movies. So while we're talking about Rick Young, he was in The Last Emperor. That was, I think it won the Academy Award. Amazing movie. He was also in You Only Live Twice, my favorite James Bond movie starring Sean Connery, which was filmed in Japan. One of the reasons I love that movie, filmed in Japan. It was also the last James Bond movie that Sean Connery filmed prior to his premature retirement. He said that he'd never come back. He came back for Diamonds Forever 4 years later after the studio paid him $1 million. But initially he said he was done with James Bond after making those first 5 movies in the 1960s. And then he came back for Never Say Never Again. And that was a clever name for the movie considering he'd already said Never Again back in 1967. So Rick Young in You Only Live Twice. How about Roy Chiao, who played Lao Che? He was in Enter the Dragon in 1974. He was in Enter the Dragon in 1973, and of course, Enter the Dragon became Bruce Lee's most famous movie. I mean, it's basically Enter the Dragon made Bruce Lee a Hollywood star. This was a, Hong Kong Hollywood co-production, and because Enter the Dragon became this phenomenal hit worldwide, and tragically, ironically, Bruce Lee died during the making of that movie, and then that movie being such a monster hit, that meant that all the other Bruce Lee movies, even the ones that he'd made prior to Enter the Dragon, became hits as well. And Kung Fu became incredibly popular around the world. So Roy Chow, he was in Enter the Dragon 1973. He was also in Enter the Fat Dragon in 1978, the year I was born. And that was kind of a parody of Enter the Dragon, and that was directed by Sammo Hung. Sammo Hung, who was good friends with Jackie Chan, and Sammo Hung and Jackie Chan worked in several movies together. And Roy Chow also worked with Jackie Chan in The Protector, 1985. His last Hollywood movie was Bloodsport in 1988. That was with Jean-Claude Van Damme. Okay, so I'm just going through some of the, minor actors in Temple of Doom. And so, I find it amazing, all these connections with movies that I love. So, how about David Yip? David Yip, he played Indy's sidekick who's disguised as a waiter in Club Obi-Wan at the beginning of the movie. He brings the remains of Nahachi to Indy at the table in Club Obi-Wan. So, yeah, his character was Wuhan, and he dies, almost immediately. I mean, there's a few dialogue scenes there, but then Lao Che says to Indy, don't, because Indy's mourning the death of his friend. He dies in his arms, and Wuhan, he says to Indy, I followed you on many adventures, but I go first, Indy, and very kind of emotional moment there. But Lao Che says to him, don't worry, Dr. Jones, you will soon be joining him because he's just poisoned Indy's champagne. And so there's this amazing sequence with the diamond and the antidote. I mean, that the choreography on that scene, the music, everything. I mean, that scene alone is like a masterpiece, just incredible. But talking about David Yip, he was in A View to a Kill, which was Roger Moore's final James Bond movie in 1985. He was also in Entrapment, 1999, which I consider Sean Connery's final James Bond movie, even though it's not a James Bond movie, it's a heist movie starring Catherine Zeta-Jones. I mentioned that earlier, that they filmed in Kuala Lumpur, and the Malaysian government wasn't happy because they cut and spliced scenes from Malacca and Kuala Lumpur. But Entrapment, I reviewed that movie last week, so if you like Sean Connery, if you like heist movies, if you want to see Sean Connery's last awesome movie where he's a thief, it's also a bit of a homage to Catch a Thief, another movie that I reviewed. But if you like heist movies, spy movies, Sean Connery, movies filmed in Asia, Entrapment, check out my review. Briefly about one of the actors, one of the Indian characters. So D.R. Nanayakara, he played the shaman in Temple of Doom. So you see the shaman, key scene, as soon as they arrive in India, after the raft has gone off the cliff in the Himalayas. So their plane has crash landed and they've jumped out. There's no parachute, so they had a inflatable raft. This amazing action sequence. Some people think they jumped the shark there. I don't really think so. I mean, is it possible? Especially the inflatable raft landing on the snow. That part is totally believable to me because the plane is not that far off the ground there, and snow is that gives them a somewhat soft landing. There's the cushion of the inflatable raft, and again, they're not that far off the ground. I guess the less believable aspect of that scene is shortly after that, they completely go off this huge cliff. It's hundreds and hundreds of meters. I forgot where they filmed that. Maybe it was Yosemite. I think that was filmed somewhere in America, but or maybe it was a quarry. Anyway, but that wasn't filmed. That wasn't filmed in Sri Lanka, I think. So, and maybe it was also like a miniature. But you have this raft falling down this massive cliff. So to survive that fall, probably does jump the shark a little bit. I mean, I didn't mind that. The only aspect of that whole sequence that, a minor nitpick is the CGI. This movie hardly has any CGI, but you have the CGI, when they're in the raft and they're going through the snow and the pine trees, that's kind of dodgy. It doesn't kind of match up. I mean, I would say that's called rear projection. That technique, it works better in To Catch a Thief in 1955 than it does in Temple of Doom. I mean, it's fine. It's only, it's probably like less than 5 seconds, but everything else about that scene looks awesome to me. Maybe jumping the shark a bit for the inflatable raft to go off the cliff from the Himalayas into India and fall in the river, in this whitewater river. Maybe stretching reality a bit too far there. But the only thing that annoyed me, and it annoyed me even as a kid, was those brief seconds where you see the CGI or rear projection of the background, which doesn't match up with the scenery. And technically the movie is amazing, so I shouldn't criticize, but I would say Hitchcock actually did the car chase scenes in Monaco. He did those scenes better than the life raft rear projection scenes in Temple of Doom. Okay, so I was talking about this actor who played the shaman. So apparently, he was a famous Sri Lankan actor. He'd been in many movies going back to 1949, but he couldn't speak a word of English. So props to him and props to Spielberg, who phonetically basically fed the lines to Dr. Nanayakara. So those scenes in the Indian village at the beginning of the movie, and then the final scenes of the movie when Indy and Short Round and Willie Scott return to the village, happy with all the kids freed from their slavery and the green hills. They come back to life. That was filmed in Kandy, traveled to Kandy, but he just has this awesome aura. The shaman, the way he speaks English is so cool and so amazing that he couldn't speak a word of English, but he memorized his lines, or as Spielberg was feeding them to him. And as soon as you see him, like actually the first time you see him, you see his feet. So it's that life raft scene in the river in the Himalayas. You think that Indy, Short Round and Willie, you think that they're finally going to catch a break, because you've just had this ridiculously exciting, thrilling, non-stop action, roller coaster, jet coaster sequence from Club Obi-Wan, where you had the sequence on the ballroom. You had the crazy scene where Indy's trying to find the antidote and Willie's trying to find the diamond, and all the balloons and then the machine guns, and it's just completely amazing. I mean, that's the scene that got me hooked. As a 7-year-old, I think I came in after Willie Scott's musical Anything Goes sequence, and I think it just happened to be on TV, and I assumed it was some old movie that not my vibe as a 7-year-old. But then you're watching this crazy scene where they're all this non-stop action and people being punched and kicked in the balloons, and then suddenly there's the machine guns come and Indy's being fired at, and he kind of grabs Willie and then he dives out of this window, uses this big gong thing to apparently that sequence they planned to use in Raiders of the Lost Ark, but it was one of their great ideas that they couldn't manage to fit into Raiders of the Lost Ark, so they decided to squeeze it into Temple of Doom. Glad they did. That was amazing. And so they fall out of the window of this 6 or 7 story building in this nightclub district in Shanghai, actually Macau, and they're falling out, and it's like they actually, I think in the movie Aladdin, they actually did kind of a copycat of this. I mean, maybe Charlie Chaplin or someone did a similar scene, 100 years ago, but this is the first time I'd ever seen a scene like this in a movie, where you've got the bouncing from, window cover to window cover, these shades, these canvases covering the windows, and they're going one side to another, and then 5 or 6 stories, they finally, and scenes like this have been used in Jackie Chan movies. Maybe this is ripped off of Hong Kong cinema from the 70s. I don't know. I mean, So they finally get to the just hang above the street, I guess, you're on the second floor, and then you have Short Round, who's introduced to us, and he's waiting in his car, and he's I don't know, like a 10-year-old kid, and he's got these wooden blocks attached to his feet so that his feet can reach the pedals, and that was a 1934 Duesenberg Autumn 1934 Duesenberg Auburn convertible. Amazing car. I mean, I'm not a car person, but that car looks amazing. So yeah, they fall into that, and then there's that whole action sequence is just non-stop thrills, a bit sexy, because Indy's trying to get he's trying to get the antidote out of Willie Scott's, hidden it in her dress, between her cleavage. So he's basically groping her, but I guess it would be somewhat creepy out of context, but understandable, because she's basically hiding the antidote. He's going to die immediately if he can't get the antidote. So in the movie it makes sense, and a bit sexy, a bit sexist, whatever. But then it looks like he's groping her, but all he wants is the antidote. I mean, later we find out there is this attraction between them, and very playful attraction. But and she's saying, I'm not that kind of girl. And Short Round is saying, no time for love, we're being shot at. So the dialogue is amazing. The action is amazing. That whole sequence, and as soon as they get out of the car chase and get to the airport, they're greeted by Dan Aykroyd. That's a very obscure, cameo, because you don't see his face close up. It's at a distance, but you recognize his voice. And this came out the same year as Ghostbusters. 1984, what an amazing year for cinema. I mean, some have said this is the best year for cinema, and yeah, I would have to agree. So some of my favorite movies came out 1984. Temple of Doom, naturally. Romance in the Stone, another one I love, another movie I've reviewed, right up there. My favorite Michael Douglas movie, one of my favorite adventure movies. The Karate Kid, I mean, come on. The Karate Kid made Kung Fu popular worldwide, and even recently you've had the Cobra Kai TV series been a big hit on Netflix, and it was on YouTube Originals before that, and big comeback for William Zabka, who played the antagonist Johnny Lawrence in the original Karate Kid. So if you like Karate Kid, I mean, that's where it all began, 1984. Also, you had Beverly Hills Cop, Eddie Murphy, all-time classic, Ghostbusters, all-time classic. So many incredible movies came out in 1984. Oh yeah, Ghostbusters, Dan Aykroyd. So he has that little cameo there. They get on the plane. You think they have like a moment to relax, and Indy kind of pulls down his fedora, and there's again the banter between him and Willie Scott, and she's saying, you couldn't lay your eyes off me as soon as you saw me in the club, and so you get this idea there's this attraction between them. They're both, I guess it's kind of childish, but it's fun, and it plays like a screwball comedy. So there's that homage to, especially like Cary Grant movies from the 1930s. And yeah, the last movie I reviewed was To Catch a Thief. And it's much more obvious in the bedroom scene later at Bangkok Palace. Anyway, you think they have a chance to relax on the cargo plane, even though you realize that actually Indy's fallen for Lao Che's trap. So there's that great visual gag because he says, so long, Lao Che, and then he closes the door, and it's actually one of Lao Che's planes. And then the pilots, they parachute out. Plane crash lands. There's that whole jumping the shark scene, but not for me, but many people have criticized that scene. Amazing sequence where they fall in the inflatable raft, and then they get down to the river, and you think once again, oh, finally they kind of kick, Indy lies back, and Willie Scott, she lies back. It's like, oh, finally, you know, after 30 minutes. Well, it's 30 minutes in the movie time, but I guess in the story wise, it's been a few hours, because they've flown over the Great Wall of China, and actually, people who know their geography, that scene doesn't make sense. Probably Spielberg wouldn't make this mistake now in 2025, but again, in 1983, when they filmed the movie, you didn't have Wikipedia, you didn't have YouTube, you couldn't just, if you wanted to look at geography, you had to look at an Encyclopedia Britannica or something. You didn't have Google Maps back then. So supposedly they cross over the Great Wall of China from Shanghai on their way to the Himalayas, but not possible. But who cares? These are nitpicks. Maybe I should give John Williams the credit for being the fourth member of the Big Four. I kept saying the Big Three before, Spielberg, Lucas, and Harrison Ford, but I guess we often take the music for granted. Plenty of people praise John Williams, and he's the GOAT. He's still alive and he's still doing movie scores, but he was at the top of his game with Temple of Doom and the original trilogy, and so there's just so many amazing scenes that are heightened by the amazing music, and it's the edits, it's the way they go from the Indy theme to the Willie Scott theme to the Short Round theme to the Mola Ram theme, and then when the shaman appears, again the music shift, and so it's really ominous at first, but then you go to the village and you see this village, it kind of looks burned out, and they're talking about all the kids have disappeared and they're obviously impoverished, and there's this scene where they're eating some food and Willie Scott doesn't want to eat because she thinks the food looks disgusting or whatever, but Indy's telling her you eat up because this is like a month's food for them, and it's incredibly disrespectful, and because he's an archaeologist, he knows all about cultures, and he's culturally more sensitive than her. But that actor who played the shaman, he was amazing. And it's just incredible to me that he couldn't speak English. And, when I traveled to Sri Lanka 6 years ago, we stayed in, I think it's pronounced Galle, but it's spelled Galle, so Galle or Gal. It's this fort town on the southwest coast of Sri Lanka. They didn't film any of Temple of Doom there. They filmed near Kandy, but we stayed in Galle for about a week, and that was my favorite place in Sri Lanka. It's this, you got this incredible fort. It was built by the Portuguese, and then it was rebuilt by the Dutch. And I love this kind of mix of architecture and history, colonialism, and Asia, and this mix. And so you got this old fort town, and the fort is still intact, and apparently that's why Galle survived the tsunami. There was the tsunami in Indonesia. It was like 15 years ago, this massive tsunami, and so parts of Sri Lanka were hit very badly, but apparently Galle did fine, partly because of that fort, which is 500 years old. And that, if you ever go to Sri Lanka, definitely make Galle one of your goals, because that town, you have peacocks flying about. To people who don't know birds, they might be say, what are you talking about? Peacocks don't fly. And even though I'm a bird nerd, if you see the name of my channel, it's called Birdfire, I'm a bird nerd. I wrongly assumed that peacocks couldn't fly until I went to Sri Lanka and I saw peacocks flying. They don't fly very well. It's more like the inflatable raft coming out of the airplane in the Himalayas in Temple of Doom kind of flying. They kind of parachute down awkwardly. But this city of Galle, the old fort town, you have wild peacocks, and they're jumping from rooftop to rooftop and parachuting about. You have monkeys jumping between the old rooftops, and you have this incredible old city. and you have sand monitors, these big monitor lizards. They're maybe, I don't know, fifth or sixth largest lizard in the world. I mean, of course, the largest lizard is the Komodo dragon. I think the second biggest is the water monitor. So I saw a water monitor in Kandy. These huge, they swim. They're like real dinosaurs. But around this fort, monitor lizards, they're basically climbing the fort walls and walking around. It's incredible. It's like a scene out of it's like the crocodiles walking around the fort in Romancing the Stone. Anyway, so we went to this, every morning we went to this kind of milk bar / breakfast place, and we get, a local curry, Sri Lankan style curry. And there was this old guy who ran the milk bar / restaurant, and he kept saying to us as we'd leave, very friendly guy, but he spoke like the shaman. He spoke English, pretty well, but he spoke English, with the accent similar to the shaman, and had a little bit of a similar look to the shaman. So I associate the shaman in Temple of Doom with this very friendly old guy we met in Galle, in Sri Lanka, who ran the milk bar. And every time we'd leave, after we stayed there a week and went to his place every day, he'd say, good day, long life, very friendly. Hope he's still alive. I don't know, he's probably in his 80s when we met him. Briefly back to Kate Capshaw. Yeah, a lot of people don't like her character. I guess they think she's, screaming too much. And okay, I get it a little bit, because, but as I said, that's, if you want to blame someone, blame Spielberg, because he was the one pushing her to scream a lot and coaching her how to scream. I guess she's, if you're a feminist, you might be kind of offended by her character, because she plays a kind of superficial gold digger, an eye candy. She's tagging along for the adventure, but at one stage, Indy says to her, I let you tag along, doll, and he calls her doll. But, it's a caricature, and these movies are paying homage to the, serials from the 1940s, I think it is. And she's supposed to be this, nightclub singer in 1930s Shanghai. So I don't think there were many, strong-willed feminists, outspoken feminists, as nightclub singers in 1930s Shanghai. So if you take the story in its context, her character makes sense. And, there's a lot of fun banter between her and Indy. So it's great flirtatious banter to my liking. The only other movies that I watched that I recognized her in were Black Rain. And in Black Rain, that's a Michael Douglas movie directed by Ridley Scott, or starring Michael Douglas, directed by Ridley Scott, set in late 80s Japan, during bubble era Japan, and she plays a nightclub hostess, similar to her Willie Scott character in Black Rain. And Black Rain, if you like the original Blade Runner, if you like Ridley Scott, if you like Michael Douglas, you should definitely check out Black Rain. So she kind of plays a contemporary version of her Willie Scott character in Black Rain, although to my thinking much less likable. She's a much more cynical, she's a cynical character in Temple of Doom as well, but in Temple of Doom, she's more up for a laugh, and just the nature of the movie, it's injected with so much humor. It's basically a comedy. Temple of Doom is a comedy. That's probably another reason why it's my favorite, whereas I don't think any of the other Indiana Jones movies are comedies. They have humor sprinkled throughout, and you could even say that it's a buddy comedy in Last Crusade between Ford and Sean Connery, but to my thinking, Temple of Doom is it could be, aside from the adventure, aside from the roller coaster element of it, aside from the horror element of it, it's also a bit of a horror movie because of all the horrible stuff that goes on in the temple, and they probably do cross the line slightly. I would have cut out maybe 5 minutes where the guy's heart gets ripped out and it's still pumping and he's still alive. That was a bit too gross for my liking. So you could call Temple of Doom a horror movie from that element, and you could also call it a comedy. I mean, it's an oxymoron. Comedy, horror, adventure. And it's part of this, chaos, which I love. And I think Spielberg, he doesn't realize, how good it was, because, it's almost like he made The Last Crusade to apologize for Temple of Doom, and it's almost like in Temple of Doom he's doing all these visual gags to apologize for the dark story which he disliked, and yet that's what makes the movie so magical. And it's people these days, they talk about how movies never take risks. I mean, Temple of Doom is just balls to the wall, beginning to end. It's all about risks. So you probably couldn't make a movie like this again. But, I should finish up on Kate Capshaw. Yeah, the only other movie I saw in was Just Cause, and that starred Sean Connery, one of Sean Connery's best movies in the 1990s, 1995, with Sean Connery and Lawrence Fishburne. And, coincidentally, Sean Connery was offered Lawrence Fishburne's role in The Matrix, but Connery turned it down. And then he kind of, got fed up with the movie business after A League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I talked about that in Entrapment in my previous movie review. Okay, so she kind of retired young, and she made a bunch of movies in 1984, but then her career kind of petered out, and the only other notable one for me was Black Rain, but I guess she was happy to become Mrs. Spielberg. And then let's look at Harrison Ford. I mean, just amazing. This is legendary run. Talk about being at the right place at the right time. So Harrison Ford, he's doing some carpentry work at the studio where Lucas was doing the auditions for Han Solo, and apparently legend has it that Harrison wasn't even auditioning for Star Wars, but he just happened to be there, and I guess they got fed up with all the actors that they auditioned that day, and so someone said, let him read with Carrie Fisher and Mark Hamill. Maybe George Lucas said, okay, we've gone through our roll call of auditions today, so we need someone to just sort of stand in for Han Solo, not taking him seriously that he would be Han Solo. And then, the rest is history. Harrison gets the role. So, beginning 1977, Harrison Ford's, legendary career begins, really. I mean, it wasn't his first role. His first role was in 1966, and he was one of the last actors to be part of the studio system, as was, Cary Grant was, Sean Connery was, many actors. Initially, they went to Hollywood and they would just sign a contract with the studio, and the studio would they would decide how to use you. I mean, they might have you as a background character, they might give you a leading role. They decided, but basically you had a contract for several years, and Harrison Ford was one of the last people to emerge from the studio system, which, his first movie came out in 1966. He's uncredited. I think he was just like a page boy. He had like one line, and famously some producer told him, the problem with you is, he said, like, the thing is with Marlon Brando, the moment you saw Marlon Brando in A Streetcar Named Desire, you that's a star, and you thought, and Harrison cheekily said to him, I thought he's supposed to be the character. You're not supposed to be awed by his star power. And so the producer said, I'm done with you, kind of thing. So it seemed like Harrison's, movie career was over in the mid-70s. But yeah, he gets the role of Han Solo, and then by fluke again he gets the role of Indiana Jones. So here's the magic run. The real magic run is 1980, The Empire Strikes Back. Many people consider that the best Star Wars movie. Yeah, probably me too. It is the darkest movie in the original trilogy, and Empire Strikes Back, 1980. Raiders of the Lost Ark, 1981. Oh, I think previously I said 1982, so sorry. Raiders of the Lost Ark, 1981. Blade Runner, 1982. Bang, bang, bang. You know, 3 iconic characters, one year after another. Han Solo, Indiana Jones, Rick Deckard, 80, 81, 82. Return of the Jedi, again back to Han Solo. Indiana Jones, The Temple of Doom, again back to Indiana Jones. I mean, 5 movies in a year, 5 movies in a row, 5 years in a row, 1980 to 1984. This alone makes Harrison Hall of Fame material. Okie dokies, alrighty then. I really better wrap this up. This has been way too long. I'm going to have to chop out half of this review. Even if I cut out half of this review, it's going to be too long, but whatever. So if you've listened to my review, thanks for listening. Thanks for your patience. What's not to love? Even some minor criticisms aside, Temple of Doom, it really is a unique movie. It really is a risky one-off, you know, the best of old school special effects and new school. It really hit the sweet spot of Spielberg's career, George Lucas's career, Harrison Ford's career. Also unique in terms of the locations, you know, that they set it in China and set it in India. And, you know, visually it's got the most variety, and visually it's the most, you know, magical, adventurous, awesome adventure movie ever made, to my thinking. Yeah, I mean, in the intro, I showed a few scenes. Most of the scenes that I've cut and paste there are just dialogue scenes that I love from Club Obi-Wan and from the cargo plane and Bangkok Palace, where you got especially I love that the will they won't they scene as an homage to the old classic rom-coms from the 1930s. But you know, it's very hard for me to pick out which scenes to post there, because basically I love the whole movie except for maybe 5 minutes in the second third where they rip the heart out, and it just drags on a bit too much there. But I understand that, you know, it's because the middle section is so dark that you have that euphoria of the minecart chase and then the rope bridge scene, and then going back to the village and he meets the shaman again and he says, you know, now you get the importance of the stones. Now you see the merit of the stones. You bring back to us, and the movie comes full circle, and it's a joyful ending. But this movie is pure joy. So if you're in the mood for a pick-me-up, and if you haven't watched Temple of Doom for a long, long time, rewatch it with fresh eyes and enjoy it. This is a movie that they could never make again. I mean, you could say that with all of the original trilogy movies, but this one especially, you know, especially because there's the cultural insensitivity, and there's the, you know, even with Willie Scott character, because she's kind of a parody of those, you know, the girlfriends who come along for the ride who are gold digger or something like that. With modern sensibilities, a character like that wouldn't be allowed even as a parody. You know, I do think that character was intended slightly as a parody, but and Short Round, Huy Quan, best child actor, best child character in movie history. And I really love how they become this kind of adopted family. So it's like Short Round is Indy's adopted son, and he's got his new girlfriend along for the ride, Willie Scott, who's a lot of fun. And I think her character is criticized too much. I mean, they criticize the character Willie Scott, they criticize Kate Capshaw too much. She was great in the movie. Everyone's great in the movie. All the Indian actors or Sri Lankan actors, all the Chinese actors, Malaysian actors, Hong Kong actors, they're all amazing. Masterpiece. Thanks for listening. Have a good one. Take it easy. Ciao for now.
Anna, lady, we going for a ride.
Oh my God! Is he nuts?
You know nuts. He's crazy.
Molaram, prepare to meet Kali in hell. Oh! What are you doing?
We know you are coming back when life returns to our village. Now you can see the magic of the rock. You bring back